So what is home? Home is meant to be a place of safety, identity, and belonging. I guess I saw a sign, I think back in Pennsylvania, it said, it is a place where you will always be surrounded by those who love you, the person or place you want to return to for refuge, a place of a feeling of belonging. That's what I read. But I think in our fractured world, home is often contested, lost, or renegotiated. And as a single person, it can be hard to find a place called home once you leave your parents' house. Even at times, I hear from many friends of mine who are married. They find also trouble building a home together as a couple or as a family when they cannot agree on many things or can't compromise with one another easily. And today's passage starts with this long-awaited Isaac having been born and weaned. And Abram's promised a home, I guess, in that sense, is finally here and secure, right, in Isaac. But what happens? His promised home child, Isaac, suddenly destabilizes others in the story, if you will. So we find three characters today finding their way back home. Hagar, an Egyptian slave mother, and Abimelech, a Philistine pagan king. And they both leave Abram's camp to go back home today, both figuratively and physically. Through this story, third, Abraham also learns to manage his home as a blessing to others. So I'm going to talk about these three characters today. So the first part of the story begins with a family breakdown. So Sarah, as Jason read for us, Sarah demands the expulsion of Hagar and Ishmael. And it's fascinating that in verse 9, Sarah saw Ishmael, about a 16-year-old boy, laughing, literally in Hebrew, metzachak, or playing with, laughing or playing with Isaac. And that triggered her. Here's the reason why she's casting them away. In verse 10, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. See, from Sarah's point of view, Ishmael was a threat to Isaac. They are both Abram's sons, and Ishmael's is older. So you can understand why Sarah suddenly felt insecure about him staying at home. But it's not the first time for Hagar, if you remember chapter 16. But this time it is for real. Her mistress has delivered the verdict on her. It seems like her master, Abraham, has nothing he can do about it. And worse yet, it seems like God condones it too. So Hagar loses her home again and enters the wilderness of Beersheba. The only thing she got from Abraham are a loaf of bread and a skin of water. And then she goes from a secure home to an absolute homelessness. And when the water runs out, she leaves her son under a bush. And moving about a bowshot distance from him, Hagar sits down and she cries out. Verse 16, it says, "Let me not look on the death of the child." And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. I don't know if you have ever felt this extreme level of helplessness and powerlessness at the same time. Have you ever found yourself just weeping? Because that is the only thing you can do. Whatever the category is, whether it's marriage, parenting, job search, education, you're just trying to survive, but you find yourself, only thing you can do is just weeping. If you feel like you are left all alone, and be able to empathize with Hagar today, here is how God responds to you in verses 17 and 18. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation," God says. And the text notes that it was Hagar crying out and weeping, but God says, and then God heard the 16-year-old boy, who was probably was also crying from a bowshot distance away from his mom. So to Hagar, God says, "Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand." It's a little less dramatic or romantic than the song "You Raise Me Up," if you think about it. God tells Hagar, who sits in complete abandonment and desolation, to rise up, to lift up the boy and hold him fast with her own hand. Surprisingly, it's not God reaching out his hand and raise her up. It is Hagar herself who needs to find bravery and fortitude from within her current state. I'm going off a little bit of off script here. There was a time in my life that I felt like no one could understand and no one could help my state, and I was just left all alone, and I think at the time I just wanted someone to reach out to me and help, be my help. And I had to go through the long tunnel all by myself. And I think a long time I blamed God and blamed the community around me for not seeing me, not helping me, not even asking me how I was doing. But I think, coming back to this passage, I think God sometimes commends us to rise up, to lift up and hold fast. It is not someone else's responsibility, but for us to do it. So I hope you can, in your time of your helplessness and powerlessness, I hope you can find bravery and fortitude. But God promises to make him into a great nation, of course, sounding familiar, right, at this point. Then God opens her eyes to the well, to see the well, and they can so they can go on a journey. Not only that, but also God was with Ishmael, the text says. He becomes a great archer, expert at bow, and they live in the land of Paran, it says. But how does the story end? It ends with Hagar finds her son a wife from Egypt. So Hagar's final action here of finding a wife for her son, it's pretty remarkable, because it was what fathers usually did back in that day. If you we didn't get to that point, but if you remember Genesis 27, chapter 24, Abraham sends his servant to find a wife for Isaac. In chapter 29, Laban negotiating to give Leah and Rachel as wives to Jacob. So it was father's job. But if you think about it, Hagar's action is not only bold and courageous at the end, but it is also a story of a return to her home to find herself. See, Hagar had known a world where her mistress Sarah had taken her and given her to Abraham. And so now, when she in turn takes a woman and gives her to her son, Ishmael, she is in a sense going back to a place from which she once fled, and from which she had once been sent away to. It's a traumatic place. She's repeating that. But this time it's a redeemed story. God is not going to send her away, nor will she be subjected to Sarah again. See, Hagar learns to embrace herself as home, you see. She doesn't let her trauma eat her up. Hagar finds her home through losing her home and being driven into the wilderness. But in that season, she learns to rise up and be responsible for herself. And God is faithful to her in that season. And to Ishmael on their journey to embrace who they are and to find home. So friends, if you feel like you are driven into the wilderness where there is no help available for you, rise up and hold fast. Rise up and hold fast. God sees you and He hears you. He will be with you just as He was with Hagar and Ishmael in the wilderness. And I hope you can find home through your wilderness. And immediately after Hagar finds a home in the wilderness, King Abimelech arrives at Beersheba. He acknowledged that God is he acknowledged that God is with you in all that you do, and wants a treaty in verses 22 and 23. See, Abimelech is a king, but he recognized that Abraham's God is making Abraham a threat to his own home. You see? So what Abimelech is doing is he wants to ensure his people's home and future longevity. So he says in verse 23, to my offspring and to my posterity. So he wants to secure that. He wants to ensure that Abraham is not going to mess with his people. In their conversation, Abraham reproves Abimelech regarding the well that Abimelech's servants seized from him. So there was tension between Abraham's people and Abimelech's people. But in other words, Abraham's presence, it threatens Abimelech, and they just need to square it out. So Abraham makes a domestic covenant to draw safe boundaries with Abimelech. And so the peace is established through a covenant they made. No more feud over the well of water. But I want to point out something intriguing in the last few verses. In verse 32, it explicitly says, "Then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, rose up and returned to the land of Philistines." They're Philistines, so they went back to their home. But also note that verse 34, our last verse, says, "And Abraham sojourned many days," not somewhere else, "in the land of Philistines." Unlike the story in chapter 13, way back, chapter 13, where Abraham and Lot, they departed from each other, even though they're related. Abraham and Abimelech live in the land of Philistines together. Because of the treaty with Abraham, Abimelech can go back home with security and peace. You see? Abraham's blessings and prosperity do not consume his neighbors, but they rather start to stabilize them. What this story is doing is that it's telling us that God's people, our job is to create the space for the community around them to live safely and securely. You see? Okay. So everyone goes home safe. Everyone's has gone home. What about Abraham? See, he learns what it means to be a blessing to others through these conflicts and his management of them. He learns how to send off Hagar, even though he was deeply displeased with the situation between Hagar and Sarah. God told him to. He learns how to make peace with his neighbor, Abimelech. And in that space, everyone experiences God. Hagar met the God who saw her, heard her, and was with her and Ishmael all the way. And Abimelech too. In verse 33, I know our English Bible states that Abraham is the subject of the sentence, but the Hebrew text makes it ambiguous whether it was Abraham or Abimelech who planted the tree and called the name of the Lord. We don't know. But I think this is intentional. What I think the verse 33 is doing is that Abram's presence around Abimelech in Philistine changed this pagan king's view of God and made him a worshiper just like him. You see? So despite the conflict, feud, hurt, pain, and everything in our lives, God's grace as always spills over. His mercy spills over boundaries we set. You see? Hagar finds home. Abimelech goes home in peace. Abraham learns how to make his life a home for others. So friends, if you feel like Hagar today, cast out, running out of resources, and facing despair in the wilderness, all alone, and weeping, know that the everlasting God hears you and hears your cry in the desert. So rise up, look up, and see the well of life God has opened for you if you're like Hagar. If you're moving through life like Abimelech, exhausted from protecting your own kingdom, your own security, and your own home, your family, stop fighting the people of God in your life. Recognize where God's grace is moving and make peace with people around you. And establish peace and security through that. And for the rest of us, I hope we can learn the lesson that Abram has been learning in his journey. I hope we can manage our conflict with grace. Plant deep roots of faith in our neighborhoods, with our neighborhoods, and live as peaceable witness. And let's build a church where the outsider finds a well and the neighbor finds peace here, until we all find our ultimate home in God Himself. So let's pray.